When you hear the word agriculture, your mind instinctively paints a picture of tranquility. You imagine golden fields of wheat swaying beneath a clear blue sky, the quiet dignity of a farmer working the soil, and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of rain. It is a comforting vision deeply ingrained in the human psyche, a nostalgic echo of a simpler time when civilization lived in harmony with the natural world. But in the Imperium of man, nostalgia is an evolutionary dead end. The light dies quickly. The soil does not breathe. Instead, the earth is systematically tortured, force-fed a suffocating cocktail of synthetic bioaccelerants until the bedrock itself groans under the crushing weight of 1 trillion desperate appetites. There are no quaint tractors or quiet rural communities on an Imperial Agri-World. You will find only macro harvesters the size of entire hive spires, mechanical leviathans that strip the crust of the planet bare, leaving behind a scarred wasteland of chemical ash and rotting roots. The skies above are not blue, but a choking, bruised purple, stained forever by the exhaust of orbital lifters and the ceaseless venting of localized atmosphere scrubbers that routinely fail to keep the acidic rain at bay. Before we descend further into this toxic fog to uncover exactly how the Adeptus Administratum feeds a sprawling galaxy of war, take a moment to subscribe and join our ranks. The truth of the Imperium is often buried beneath the layers of propaganda, and we are here to excavate it, layer by rotting layer. So make sure you hit the notification bell to never miss a transmission. The scale of this planetary devastation is not an accident of mismanagement or a localized tragedy. It is a meticulously calculated formula, a mathematical certainty designed by faceless bureaucrats sitting in orbital stations. Completely insulated from the poisoned mud below, they view planets not as living ecosystems with delicate balances, but as temporary batteries of calories, destined to be drained and discarded for the survival of the species. To understand the existence of an agri-world, you must first understand the staggering logistical nightmare of the Imperium of man. A single hive world, bristling with macro cities of plasteel and concrete, houses hundreds of billions, sometimes trillions, of starving citizens. They produce weapons, munitions, and soldiers, but they cannot produce a single blade of edible grass. This creates a terrifying parasitic dependency. The hive world is the mouth, forever screaming for sustenance, and the agri-world is the sacrificed flesh, bled dry to keep the colossal dough chewing. The math is brutal. The administratum calculates only survival. But this survival is measured not in the flourishing of humanity, but in the coal. Mechanical conversion of living ecosystems into standardized caloric quotas, traded across the void in monumental bulk landers. To the adepts in their orbital spires, the planet is simply a ledger of soil density and biomass potential, a temporary asset to be liquidated to offset the eternal deficit of starvation. Thus, the architecture of starvation is built. An agri-world is stripped of its native biodiversity, its oceans often drained or heavily processed to serve as colossal irrigation vats for genetically hyper-modified monocultures. These engineered crops do not grow. They aggressively consume. They are designed to extract every microscopic ounce of nutrient from the mantle, growing at a cancerous rate to meet the relentless tide. There is no crop rotation, no fallow periods to let the earth heal. Healing takes time. Time is a luxury the Imperium cannot afford when a hive world is 3 days away from cannibalistic riots. The infrastructure required to process this explosive growth defies planetary logic. Continents are paved into vast, perfectly flat geogrids, stretching beyond the horizon, completely devoid of natural topography. Mountains are flattened, and rivers are redirected into colossal aqueducts of plasteel. Across these infinite plains roll the agricultural crawlers' monolithic machines that resemble the treaded cities of the Adeptus Mechanicus Smother. Any traditional farming equipment, they crawl at an agonizingly slow pace, deafening the landscape with the grinding of their massive engines. simultaneously reaping, processing, and packaging the harvest in one continuous, apocalyptic motion. Within the belly of these metal beasts, and across the suffocating plains, toil the menials. These are not farmers bound by the rhythm of the seasons. They are biological cogs in an industrial meat grinder. They are imported by the millions, housed in cramped, utilitarian hablocks that cling like parasites to the sides of the processing plants. Their existence is dictated by the shrieking sirens of shift changes and the ever-present hum of atmospheric scrubbers struggling against the caustic air. The true horror of their existence lies in the very crops they cultivate. The Imperium's bioengineers prioritize yield and resilience over safety. The resulting flora is often highly toxic while alive, possessing razor-sharp silicate leaves or emitting hallucinogenic spores to ward off native pests that survived the initial planetary scout. Harvesting is not a matter of gentle reaping, but a localized war against aggressive, bioengineered flora. The menials must wear heavy rebreathers and hazard suits, which are frequently compromised by the acidic sap and corrosive dust that define their environment. The architecture is perfectly clothed, a loop of misery engineered for maximum yield. The planet gives everything it has, and the humans who work it give everything they are. There is no joy in the harvest, no festival of plenty, only the grim satisfaction of a quota met and a brief reprieve from the executioner's bull. The administratum does not care how many bones are crushed beneath the treads of the crawlers, so long as the grain silos in orbit are filled. Flesh is cheap, calories are priceless. To understand the true horror of an Imperial Agri-World, you must look closely at the soil. The earth here is fundamentally dead. It has been stripped of its natural microbial life, scorched by atmospheric processing, and compacted by the weight of macro-harvesters. Left to nature, this dirt could not sustain a single weed. Therefore, it must be violently forced to yield through a regime of relentless chemical and biological augmentation. The primary catalyst for this unnatural fertility is not standard manure or synthetic nitrogen, but the recycled organic waste of the Imperium itself. Millions of tons of processed biomatter are shipped down from orbital platforms every day. This is the grim reality of Imperial logistics, the refuse of the Hive Worlds, including the pulverized bones and reclaimed proteins of the billions who die in the macro-cities, is shipped out to fertilize the agri-worlds. The cycle closes, the dead return, but they do not return to a peaceful grave. They are systematically ground into a nutrient-dense slurry, forced back into the poisoned earth to catalyze the growth of the very crops that will eventually feed the next generation of laborers. It is a grotesque alchemy, a closed-loop system where human suffering is transmuted directly into caloric output. Once the soil is force-fed this necrotic slurry, the seeds are planted. But these are not the gentle grains of ancient terror. They are high-progressive, bioengineered flora designed by the Magos biologists to extract nutrients with terrifying efficiency. These plants grow at a visible, cancerous rate, completely dominating the landscape and strangling any native life that might have miraculously survived the initial planetary scouting. Because these crops are so dense in manipulated nutrients, they act as a beacon for the most resilient and mutated pests in the sector. To protect the investment, the administratum authorizes the use of chemical pesticides that would be classified as apocalyptic weapons of mass destruction on any civilized world. These chemical agents are sprayed indiscriminately from low-flying atmospheric landers, painting the sky in sickly hues of bruised purple and jaundiced yellow. The toxic rain settles over the sprawling geogrids, coating everything in a corrosive film. It eats through the plasteel plating of the macro-harvesters and slowly dissolves the heavy rubberized boots of the menials trudging through the mud. The crops themselves are often hostile. To ensure survival in this caustic environment, the bioengineers have bred defensive mechanisms into the flora. Stalks of engineered wheat are lined with microscopic, razor-sharp silicate barbs to deter mutated scavengers. Tubers pulse with localized toxins that only neutralize after heavy, high-heat processing in the orbital manufactrums, the fluorophytes. The harvest bleeds. You do not peacefully reap these genetically tortured fields. You wage a desperate, localized war against predatory root systems and high-progressive spore clouds that view the human harvesters as just another source of organic fertilizer. The menials who work these fields are given hazard suits and rebreathers. But this equipment is manufactured by the lowest bidder and heavily recycled. Filters clog with fibrous ash within hours. Seals crack under the constant assault of acidic sap. The slow, agonizing degradation of the human respiratory system is simply factored into the planetary production quotas as an acceptable margin of biological depreciation. A menial's life is defined by the localized rot of their own flesh, skin blisters and peels beneath the cheap protective fabrics. Teeth loosen and fall out from the constant inhalation of heavy metals and aggressive fungal spores. Lungs slowly calcify, turning into a blackened sludge that leaves them gasping for every breath in an atmosphere designed strictly for the crops, not for humanity. When this frail human flesh inevitably fails, falling to the toxic mud in a fit of bloody coughing, the Adeptus Mechanicus steps in to ensure the harvest does not pause. They deploy the agricultural servitors. These are not the polished, brass-trimmed cyberneticates seen wandering the halls of a planetary governor's spire. These are bulk-spliced monstrosities, crude culminations of lobotomized criminals and industrial machinery. They are grafted directly to heavy pesticide tanks, their arms replaced with whining chainsets and hydraulic creepers. Their remaining organic skin is heavily scarred by chemical burns, left entirely exposed to the caustic rain because protecting a servitor's flesh is deemed an unnecessary expenditure of resources. They are awake. The flesh rots, but the architecture of their lobotomized minds is permanently locked into the rhythmic violence of the harvest, swinging rusty blades through clouds of corrosive dust until their mechanical joints finally dissolve into the toxic mud. They feel the burn of the acid, but the cognitive pathways required to scream have been surgically severed. This is the toxic harvest of the Imperium, a yield born of corpses, nurtured by acid and reaped by the damned. Every single grain shipped to the starving hive worlds above is steeped in this chemical agony, carrying the literal and metaphorical poison of its creation to the trillions of desperate souls waiting in the dark. To truly comprehend the nightmare of an Imperial Agri-World, you must narrow your focus. Look past the continent-sized harvesters and the bruised, weaving clouds of pesticide. Look down into the chemical mud, where the true cost of the Imperium's survival is paid in blood and breath. Here, humanity is not a species. It is merely another agricultural input, tracked on administratum ledgers alongside synthetic nitrates and heavy water. You are born. The ledger updates. But the architecture of your entire existence is already mathematically concluded. Your exact expiration date calculated by an orbital cogitator based on the expected degradation of your lung tissue in the toxic smog. There is no childhood, no period of innocent growth. From the moment your hands are large enough to grip a sorting hook or a rusted sterilization nozzle, you belong to the harvest. Home is a prefabricated hablock, a rusting metal blister clinging desperately to the side of a processing manufactory. It vibrates ceaselessly with the deafening roar of industrial threshers, shaking the toxic dust from the ceiling onto your sleeping mat. You share this suffocating space with dozens of others, sleeping in shifts, breathing recycled air that tastes permanently of ash and copper. The physical toll of the quota is absolute. You work 20-hour cycles in the caustic rain, your muscles screaming for a rest that will never come. The paradox of your existence is that you are drowning in food you are forbidden to eat. To consume a single grain of the bioengineered wheat you harvest is a crime against the Adeptus Terra, punishable by immediate reassignment to the penal legions or the servitor surgical slabs. Instead, you survive on localized rations dens, flavorless blocks of nutrient paste and recycled water. tightly controlled by the administratum overseers to ensure you have just enough caloric energy to complete your shift, but never enough to foster rebellion. You are kept in a state of perpetual, agonizing weakness, your body slowly cannibalizing itself to meet the brutal demands of the physical labor. Religion here is a bleak, utilitarian affair. The local ministorum priests preach of the emperor as the divine harvester, teaching that a quick death beneath the grinding treads of a macro tractor is a blessing, his swift release from the slow, inevitable strangulation of spore-rot. There is no concept of a peaceful passing or a dignified burial. When your lungs finally calcify and you collapse into the poisoned earth, the cycle simply accelerates. The corpse guilds do not mourn, they collect. Your body is stripped of its hazard suit, processed through the macro grinders, and rendered down into the very bone meal fertilizer that will feed tomorrow's crop. Your existence is entirely erased, your memories and dreams reduced to trace minerals in the dirt. This is the absolute erasure of the human spirit, a life measured entirely by its eventual decomposition. If you are finding value in this deep dive into the darkest corners of the Warhammer 40K universe, take a moment to leave a like and share this video with a fellow lore-seeker. Your support allows us to continue unearthing these grim truths. Now, let us ascend from the mud and look at the architects of this misery. Ascend from the toxic fog. High above the bruised atmosphere of the Agri-World orbit the macro silos and the administrative spires of the Adeptus Terra. These void stations are the true masters of the harvest, tethered to the dying planet below by colossal orbital elevators that constantly siphon the surface dry. Up here, the air is not laced with corrosive sap or pulverized bone. It is scrubbed, heavily perfumed with synthetic incense, and perfectly temperature-controlled. Look up. The silence deafens. But the architecture of these orbital sanctums is meticulously designed to sever all emotional resonance, reducing the apocalyptic suffering of a billion souls into neat, sterile columns of illuminated data on a vellum scroll. Within these quiet halls, the adepts of the administratum monitor the harvest. They do not see the calcified lungs of the menials or the mutated spore rot eating through cheap hazard suits. They see only quotas, caloric projections, and acceptable margins of biological depreciation. A localized labor collapse caused by mass starvation is not a tragedy to them. It is simply a logistical variable to be solved by the deployment of Arbite's pacification squads. This is the agonizing paradox of plenty that defines the Imperial agricultural machine. A single agri-world can produce enough synthesized protein and bioengineered grain in a standard month to feed a dozen star systems. Yet, the very hands that reap this unimaginable bounty are perpetually trembling from chronic malnutrition. The laborers are deliberately kept on the razor's edge of starvation, provided only the exact caloric minimum required to keep their hearts beating until the end of their shift. To alter this equation is a profound crime. If a starving menial is caught slipping a handful of unprocessed grain into their rebreather pouch, they are not merely punished for theft. They are prosecuted for heresy against the Adeptus Administratum, a direct crime against the Emperor's logistical decree. The punishment is swift and total, often ending with the offender being rendered down in the very fertilizer vats they once tended. The tragedy is sealed in the void. As the colossal transport barges decouple from the silos, their holds bursting with billions of tons of sustenance. They cast long shadows over the dying world below. The planet is being eaten alive, its soil permanently poisoned, and its people ground into dust. All to ensure that a Hive World 1,000 light years away can continue producing the next generation of disposable soldiers. The planet dies. It does not heal. But the architecture of this prolonged execution is a terrifying testament to human stubbornness. An agricultural system that refuses to acknowledge the fundamental laws of nature in favor of a spreadsheet's cold logic. To the Imperium, A world is not a living entity with intrinsic value. It is merely a reservoir of raw biological potential waiting to be entirely drained by the demands of the galactic war machine. On a forgotten, pre-imperial world, agriculture was a reciprocal relationship. A cycle of taking from the earth and giving back to ensure the next season's bounty. On an Imperial Agri-World, there is no cycle, only a brutal, one-way extraction. The soil is never nurtured or allowed to rest. Instead, it is strip-mined for its fundamental organic components, treated exactly the same as a vein of promethium or a deposit of adamantium. As the natural crust inevitably loses its remaining vitality, the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Magos biologists do not prescribe a period of fallow recovery. They respond with violent chemical escalation. Vast subterranean pipelines are driven miles beneath the surface, pumping high-progressive synthetic biostimulants directly into the planetary mantle. The native water tables, already polluted by centuries of toxic runoff, are entirely flash-boiled and replaced with a viscous, artificially synthesized nutrient slush. This unnatural subterranean cocktail eventually begins to dissolve the planet's fundamental bedrock. The structural integrity of the crust weakens under the relentless chemical assault. Macro-earthquakes become a daily occurrence as immense subterranean caverns hollow out, their structural supports consumed by the rapid decay of bioengineered taproots. These monstrous roots are designed to burrow for miles, seeking out and violently siphoning geothermal heat directly from the planet's core to accelerate surface growth. The atmosphere mirrors this subterranean collapse. It does not simply remain polluted. It violently degrades into a combustible, suffocating miasma. The air becomes a hyperdense soup of methane, sulfuric off-gassing, and weaponized agricultural spores. The planet's native weather patterns are entirely broken, replaced by global, continent-spanning acid typhoons that tear across the flattened geogrids, further eroding the dying soil and dissolving the abandoned husks of failed macro-harvesters. This is the true definition of an ecological death spiral. Every successive harvest requires a vastly greater injection of caustic fertilizers to yield the exact same caloric quota. Every new chemical application permanently destroys another critical layer of the planet's biosphere. The logistical cost of forcing life from a dying rock curves upward toward infinity, while the actual lifespan of the planet plummets rapidly towards zero. Contrary to the propaganda painted on the walls of Hive City hab blocks, an agri-world is never a permanent fixture. It is a biological time bomb with a strictly calculated fuse, depending on the aggressive nature of the quotas. Most of these worlds survive barely a few millennia before the topsoil is permanently transmuted into inert, radioactive glass or a toxic sludge, incapable of sustaining even the most heavily mutated transgenic flora. When the final, pathetic harvest inevitably fails, the Imperium offers no salvation and attempts no ecological rehabilitation. The gargantuan farming engines are simply powered down and left to rust in the acidic rain. The colossal orbital silos decouple, their holds empty and drift away toward the next viable target. The planet is coldly reclassified in the master ledgers from an agri-world to a dead world, a silent, poisoned tomb floating in the dark, entirely consumed by the empire it briefly kept alive. To look upon a dead agri-world is to look into the very soul of the Imperium of man. It is not merely a failed agricultural project. It is a flawless, macrocosmic reflection of humanity's current existence. The Adeptus Terror claims to protect the species, to nurture it against the horrors of a hostile galaxy. But the truth, etched into the poisoned bedrock of 1,000 dead worlds, is that the Imperium does not cultivate humanity, it consumes it. You are fuel, the system starves. But the architecture of this galactic empire is fundamentally built upon the continuous, unapologetic sacrifice of its own foundation just to survive another rotation of the sun. There is no grand vision for a prosperous future, no golden age waiting beyond the horizon of war. There is only the eternal, desperate present, maintained by devouring the collateral of tomorrow. An agri-world is the perfect physical manifestation of this philosophical rot. Just as the Magos biologists forcefully extract every nutrient from the soil until the planet shatters, the High Lords of Terror extract every ounce of labor, blood, and faith from the citizenry until their minds break. The system operates on the delusion of infinite resources in a definitively finite universe, constantly expanding its appetite while the fundamental life support systems collapse underneath the weight. Consider your place in this cosmic machinery. If an entire planet, capable of sustaining billions of life forms and complex ecosystems, is casually treated as a disposable, single-use asset, what value does your individual life hold? You are less than a microscopic grain of bioengineered wheat in the silos of the administratum. Your dreams, your suffering, and your ultimate demise are not tragedies. They are simply factored into the grand and carrying equation of the tithe. The most horrifying realization is the cyclical nature of this consumption. The Imperium burns its agri-worlds to feed its Hive Worlds, which in turn breed the unending armies of the Astra Militarum, who are then sent out to conquer or reclaim more worlds, just to begin the grinding process all over again. It is an Ouroboros of misery, a serpent aggressively eating its own tail, completely blind to the fact that it is slowly digesting its own vital organs. There is no escaping the maw of this machine. Whether you are ground into fertilizer in the toxic mud of a harvesting grid, or processed into corpse starch in the lower levels of a hive city, the end result is exactly the same. You are digested by the empire you were born to serve. The Imperium survives not by the grace of the Emperor, but by the relentless, organized cannibalism of its own people. When a manufacturer worker deep in the underbelly of a Hive World tears open their daily ration of synthetic nutrient paste, they do not think of the soul. They taste only the bitterness of ash and recycled protein, blissfully unaware that they are consuming the literal pulverized essence of an entire murdered world. They are eating the ground bones of the menials, the toxic runoff of the macro-harvesters, and the dying breath of an ecosystem deliberately strangled to keep them working for just one more shift. The cycle ends, the hunger remains. But the architecture of this galactic sacrifice guarantees that the Imperium will never truly be satisfied, forever chewing on the rotting edges of its own territory, until there is nothing left in the void but dead stars and empty grain silos. This is the true, inescapable horror of the Imperial Agri-World. It is not simply a wasteland of toxic agony, but a mirror reflecting the inevitable doom of a species that has forgotten how to nurture, knowing only how to consume. If you have survived this descent into the darkest truths of the Warhammer 40K universe, secure your place in our ranks by subscribing, liking this transmission, and leaving your thoughts in the data vaults below. Until the next cycle, the Emperor protects, but the Imperium consumes.